Welcome to the Miscellaneous Film Festival, the podcast for curiously curated films. I'm Jacin, and this week we're discussing Christmas romance movies with screenwriter Lisa Hepner. Lisa, hello, welcome.
Hi, Jacin. Thank you for having me.
This has been a lot of fun watching your movies and getting to learn more about this genre.
Oh, thank you.
The first thing I wanted to talk to you about, how did you fall into doing romance movies?
Yeah. So that's kind of interesting. So I was a screenwriter. In fact, Kristen was part of our critique group when I lived up in Oregon, and that's how Kristen and I met. But so I've been a screenwriter for a long time, and I kind of was writing like rom-coms and comedy, but as you know, it's hard to sell a screenplay. And so I figured I was watching Hallmark movies with my mom. She was sick and we moved back to New Mexico to kind of take care of her. And so we would kind of watch Hallmark movies in bed together to escape from things like, chemo treatments and like all the stuff she was going through. We would watch these movies. And I had this light bulb moment when I was in bed with her watching a movie. And I was like, wow, I'm a screenwriter. Like, Hallmark, it was a Hallmark Christmas movie. And I was like, Hallmark puts out like 40 of these movies a year.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe that's like a genre I should try. And so that was back in 2017. I thought, well, I'll start writing Christmas romance. And so I just watched a bunch of Hallmark movies and try to kind of learn the formula. And then I just started writing them.
Yeah. If you don't mind me asking, how is your mother doing now?
Oh, yeah, she passed. She passed in 2019. And then that inspired the movie, The Christmas Checklist, because I was grieving. So she passed away in June of 2019. And I was like wondering how I was going to get through that first Christmas without her. So I got the idea for a movie called The Christmas Checklist. And we can talk about that either now or later. And I wrote that. And I was kind of like, about a woman who was grieving, who lost her mom and trying to get through that first Christmas. And she gets this Christmas checklist from her mom and she does these activities and she also finds romance. And so that's what kind of inspired that movie. And that probably was my most personal movie that I've written to date, just because it was based on just, real experiences of grief and missing my mom. So,
yeah. Well, first of all, let me say, I'm sorry to hear about your mom's passing.
Thank you.
But I will say that The Christmas Checklist from 2022 is a really good movie, and I really appreciate that one. You're talking about watching all the different Hallmark Christmas movies to figure out the formula and how you might approach writing a screenplay to get into that particular genre. And one thing I've noticed from Hallmark, even though they're not all for the Hallmark channel,
right?
Anything generally is called a Hallmark romance movie, is there's a lot of things they don't touch on, specifically grief.
Right.
I know the ones I've seen, there'll occasionally be someone who's a widow or a widower.
Right.
But it seems to be in the past. And
that's true.
Like, we miss them, but I haven't moved forward yet. And it's all about moving forward and finding a partner.
Right.
You're delved into the actual missing and coping with a recent loss.
Right. Well, and that's what's interesting, and an interesting point you bring up, because I teach a class about writing holiday romance as well. And,
oh, you do?
Yeah. It's an online class every November through a group called Roadmap Writers. But
we'll have to share that information.
Yeah. So, but I tell people that the number one thing you don't want to do is include grief in a Christmas romance, because people watch these movies to escape, and you don't want to cover, like heavy topics. But I think so if that was my first movie out of the gate, I don't think that one would have gotten produced. But since I had kind of proven myself with my other movies, I think they were more willing to take a chance on it. However, when we first started with the script and going into pre-production, there was a lot of back and forth about like, we really like this movie, but you got to take out the grief. And I was like, it's about grief. And so it was kind of like, there was that little struggle. And I don't know if I think I convinced just from watching the movie, you can see, but I told him, I said, I think if we balance the grief with the cuteness and humor and the love story, I think it'll be okay. And so they did take out some of the more grieving stuff, but they still leaned into it, which I was happy for.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
And they did a good job. As someone who is not a huge fan of the Hallmark Christmas movie genre,
right?
One of my personal critiques is they're always And this is what makes it comfortable and cozy and approachable
Right.
for people, is making it low stakes.
Right.
But low stakes, I think, also affects the ability for a character to have much of a personal arc if they
Right.
don't have risk or loss or something that they're afraid of. And I thought
Right.
your script handled it just right.
Oh, thank you.
I think you did a great job of positioning somebody who was not being held back so much
Right.
or deterred so much, but in the action of dealing with grief.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that was really encouraging. And then finding, a meet cute
Mm-hmm.
who was willing to go on that journey. And so the romance building between them was parallel to her personal journey of dealing with the loss of her mother.
Right, right. Because like you said, in most of these type movies, like if there is a widow or if there's a person that lost their parent, you never get to know the parent or
It's so past tense. Yeah.
right. It's like past tense, and then we come in the movie. But I wanted this movie to start because she's in that grieving process, and I actually had a lot more flashbacks with her and her mom when she was little and stuff. But they cut a lot of those because, again, they didn't, in their minds, and I get it, but in their minds, the producers were like, we don't want people to get to know the mom as much because then it's more sad for them. But yet at the same time, as I found out, and we all find out, that Christmas can be sad for a lot of people. Like a lot of people will grieve at some point in their life. And so I wanted this movie to kind of be that for them, like a place where they could go and maybe have a good cry. Like I watch it to give myself a good cry,
Yeah.
like still, like, and I need that sometimes. So
I also found the main character, Emily, a little more relatable.
yeah.
Just because of the first scene where she's in the middle of her grief. Well, not the first scene, sorry.
Right.
An earlier scene when she's in her grief, she's trying to just go out for a cup of coffee or something. And there's a woman at the counter who's being exasperating and taking up all the time and being kind of a jerk. And Emily, instead of being the usual Hallmark lead and rolling with everything or just rolling her eyes and coping, she snaps at the lady. And right away I went, this is not your typical movie.
Exactly.
This is exceptional. Our character has real feelings, and she's not going to be sociable just for sociability's sake.
Right, right. And that was actually, I'm glad you mentioned that and actually liked that because in my experience with grief, I actually had a moment like that shortly after my mom passed. And well, first of all, I had some agoraphobia to where I didn't even want to go out of the house. And I kind of tried to cover that with that character, but they got rid of some of those elements. But then when I did go out of the house, I remember I was at like Kohl's or something one day and I was like returning some pants or something. And some lady in front of me was complaining about, she ordered charcoal gray pants instead of black. And I just felt saying like, oh my God, like my mom just died. Like, who cares about these little things? But I didn't say it, right? Because I'm like, just but I thought I'm going to incorporate that into my script because a lot of people that I've talked to that are grieving have these anger outbursts and these moments where they just feel like saying to someone, like just grabbing someone by the shoulders and saying like, gosh, this is such a insignificant event. Like when a person you love died and yet we don't. And I thought this might be a good opportunity to really put that in the movie so people can relate to it. So I'm actually glad you called that out.
and exactly, that's what it achieved. That's what made her feel relatable. With some of the others I've watched from Hallmark specifically, I find the characters completely unrelatable.
Right.
Where everything just seems to fall into place.
Perfect.
Yeah. So with all these movies, there seems to be just a general unabashed aspect of romance in the old-fashioned sense. Was that something you wanted to lean into as a screenwriter?
I mean, I don't know. Again, I think it was just me making the decision. So I told you about why I decided to kind of go into writing Christmas romance because I was a screenwriter anyway, and I wasn't having success. And I realized that there's so many Christmas romances every year. But I also kind of shifted into a business mindset of like, if I want to make a living as a screenwriter, I need to go into like a smaller niche, if you will. And so I particularly went into Christmas romance because I'm a kind of upbeat, happy-go-lucky person. But the other thing I will say for any screenwriters or people interested is that there's other smaller niches that you can break into besides Christmas romance. And one is thrillers, like the Lifetime thrillers movies. Like if you turn on Lifetime and watch those are a way to break in. I know a screenwriter who broke in through that way with thriller movies. And then faith-based movies are also another genre that there's less competition for, and so they're easier to break in. So I guess back to your question about did I want to go like into the romance part of it? Like once I made the decision that I'm going to write Christmas romance, then yeah, of course I like leaned into it, and was like recalling. So I've been married for 20 years. And so, it's going kind of back in time and recalling like that first date or whatever. And so you kind of have to go back and lean into the romance of like when you first fell in love, or, some past experiences or whatever. But
right. With one of your other movies, Sappy Holiday,
yeah,
which is all about a woman who gets stranded on the side of the road in the middle of potentially nowhere.
Yeah.
But it turns out she's in the middle of maple syrup country.
Right.
And is rescued by a very handsome and dashing maple syrup farmer. Yeah.
Yes.
That one, I've definitely got a lot of those first date vibes. Maybe it was the actors who did such a great job. John McLaren and Vanessa Sears.
Yeah, they were so great. Great. John McLaren stars in a lot of movies. In fact, he was just in a Hallmark movie I watched recently. I forget the name of it, but so he's kind of a regular on these movies. And she was fairly new. I guess I follow her on Instagram, and she's doing Broadway right now. So
Vanessa Sears is on Broadway?
Yeah, I think.
Oh, wow.
I think I saw that she was on a Broadway show.
She was so effervescent.
She's so sweet,
had so
and
much
bubbly.
energy and a big bright smile.
She was so great.
She made the movie really exciting.
Yeah.
But that one, I think you did a great job setting them up to have a get to know you process that didn't feel. It was definitely fictionalized,
right?
But it felt like their interactions weren't so pre-scripted or formulaic.
Yeah, and that's what's kind of hard about these. It's like people think they're easy because they're so formulaic, right? But it's actually hard because they are formulaic, and so you still got to figure out like a meet cute that's not like something we've seen 1,000 times before, and like you still got to bring your creativity that still fits within that formula. And so sometimes that's a challenge, and especially like me right now, I'm writing still Christmas movies, and it's always like, I gotta come up with a unique meet cute, and I gotta have some different activities besides like building a snowman or whatever, like you gotta get creative with some of the activities and some of the storylines.
I've looked into kind of the history of Hallmark Christmas movies and looking at different networks that produce and air these, and have noticed that a few years back, looking at like 2013, when Hallmark, we'll use Hallmark just as the general keystone for it. 2013, they had 12 movies come out that year, which seemed like just the right number.
Right.
For Christmas.
Now they're like 40, right?
It is. That was 2013. 2016, it went to 28 movies. 2017, 33. And now it's 40 at least, because they're also branching into how can we get a Thanksgiving movie? How can we get other... New Year's, we didn't do that. It seems like they're exhausting the theme, and I've just noticed that there's more and more creative titles and more almost gimmicks coming together, trying to find things. Not saying that about your movie, but I found Sappy Holiday to be a winner
thank you
in that game, because just the title alone, I thought, okay, this is on the nose. Somebody just ran out of things to write about. It's a maple farm,
right
he makes maple syrup. Okay.
Well, and sometimes that happens with me. Like sometimes I'll think of a title first. So that was a case where I actually was telling someone Happy Holidays, and I accidentally said Sappy Holiday. And then I was like, oh, that's a great movie title. And then I was like, it has to be about a maple farmer. And so that's where that came from. So sometimes titles just top into your head,
It's a creative process. Sometimes the cart does come before the horse. I was speaking with a couple friends who are fans of this genre, and they were talking about a potential movie, because that's almost a game with us. It's just with a good title, and then the script writes itself based on
exactly.
They were pitching Holiday Hams, or Holiday Ham, about a female comedian who gets lost in the country and meets a pig farmer.
Oh, yes.
And we brainstormed that for a while.
Right.
I don't think you'll expect any competition, but it's a fun idea.
It is fun. And again, it's about coming up, like you'll see this year, like, so what I noticed this year too with Hallmark movies, because I record gazillions of them all the time, just to also, I love them, but also research and stuff. But they're coming up with a lot of ideas based on titles from like previous movies and kind of reworking them. So for example, last year and then this year they had the sequel to it, but they have Three Wise Men and a Baby. And so it was kind of based off of Three Men and a Baby. So they took the concept, that 80s movie, Three Men and a Baby, and they were like, someone thought, oh, let's change this to Three Wise Men and a Baby. And then they did that movie. So,
and also exploiting every part of Christmas with how many movies now have bells, BELLE.
Right.
And they're just, we can do anything with that. They should do one called Silver Bells and just do a Hallmark Christmas movie version of the Golden Girls.
Yes, exactly. And I could star in that one.
you would be fabulous.
With my silver hair, yes.
Yes.
But yeah, they do a lot of, I think it is kind of fun just to come up with titles and concepts and plots.
Well, it must also be a lot of fun to be on set for these. I know we talked about the Christmas checklist that was filmed in Montreal.
Well, no, that's the interesting thing. I haven't been on set for any of my movies. That I'm filming a movie now that I wrote that's actually being filmed in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And this is the first one I've been able to be on set for. And so it's really exciting.
Oh, that's a lot of fun.
Yeah. My first two movies, A Christmas Wish in Hudson and Christmas Lovers Anonymous, were filmed in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And they were filmed in the snow, which sometimes Hallmark has artificial snow, and they're filmed in the summer. A lot of these movies are filmed in the summer.
Obviously real.
But these were, and so was Sappy Holiday. That was filmed in Canada. But the first two movies that I made, it was during COVID. And so I didn't travel. And so I wasn't on set. There were a lot of restrictions and stuff. And then the other movies were in Canada. And then My Love at the Lodge, which is an on-Christmas, was filmed in Northern California. But yeah, I didn't get to be on set for any of those. But this one that I'm filming now, I'm on set. So we'll see.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
You said Christmas Lovers Anonymous and Christmas Wish in Hudson were filmed in the same place. Watching them together, it almost looked like they were filmed really close to each other.
They were filmed in the exact same location, Hudson, Wisconsin.
Do you know if they were filmed about the same time? Because
they were filmed back to back.
Oh, really?
So Christmas Wish in Hudson was filmed first, and then I think a week later, Christmas Lovers Anonymous was filmed. So they were filmed back to back at the same location.
So they just figured we already have all this crew.
We got all this crew, and we've got the town decorated, and we've got everything set up. So it was just like a twofer.
Now, what did that mean for you? Obviously, you didn't write those two scripts side by side. They must have been written months or years apart. Did they just happen to get picked up by the same production company?
Well, so that's a funny story about that one. So my Christmas Wish in Hudson was my first movie, and it was filmed with Nicely Entertainment, and then a director, Elizabeth Snodderly. And so that director and her daughter, who's also an actress and a producer, they worked on Christmas Wish in Hudson, and were filming that movie. And they approached me and said, I have a concept for a movie called Christmas Lovers Anonymous. And they sent me a one-page like little outline treatment of it. And they said, can we hire you to write this? And I loved the concept. I was like, oh my God, this is a riff on kind of like You've Got Mail, right? Like,
right.
And so I was like, I love this concept. I can totally do it. And so they hired me to write that. And so I wrote that. That was a pretty fast turnaround. I wrote that in 30 days, and then they shot it.
Wow.
So they shot it back to back. But I mean, I had they gave me the kind of idea and gem. And so it was kind of like one of those things where it writes itself when you have the general plot down.
Yeah. So they were in pre-production for Christmas Wish.
For the other one, yep.
They said you did such a great job. Can you do a second one so
Yeah.
that we can double up?
Yep.
Oh, that's so great.
Yeah, and so it was really nice. That was my first like writing assignment where it was like somebody else's concept, but then I was hired to write it. So what
I really appreciated about Christmas Lovers Anonymous was, again, like Christmas Checklist, it seemed to dip its toe into territory that you don't normally find in these movies. Someone who is not anti-Christmas so much, but taking a less than excited approach to Christmas, about decorating less, about doing less.
Right.
And while all with the kind of the low stakes of these movies, it seems like there's also not a lot of talk about people being over the top.
Right.
Characters are pretty mundane.
Right.
And this one's saying, hey, people in the real world who are potentially going over the top or getting overstressed by the holidays.
Right.
Maybe you should dial it down a bit.
Right, exactly. And they usually, I mean, that's not the typical like formula, because they usually want the person to be like, oh, the Queen of Christmas, and do it all over the top and be like Martha Stewart, at Christmas. And this one was, but then she had a fall from grace, and she was like, oh, I just realized it can be also a stressful thing, packing and putting away all the stuff. And so we kind of explored that angle and went with that angle. And I thought that was so fun to do. It was a really fun writing assignment. The interesting thing about that one is too, in their treatment that they sent me, they had the characters be at odds with one another, but they only interacted online, but they didn't know each other in person. But I took a riff from You've Got Mail and thought, no, they need to also be antagonists like in real life and know each other, so that there's this real life antagonism, but then online they're like in love. And so that's how that came about.
What I enjoyed was that little soupçon of scandal of both of them sort of falling for someone on an online chat room, and then being adversarial, but still kind of falling for that same person in real life and not knowing it. And knowing the formula for these movies, I realized that for Houston Rhines, the male lead, like, oh no, he's going to get caught up in a, you lied to me. You were
right. Right.
You've been flirting.
Formula, right?
Yeah, you've been flirting with some other woman,
right?
And even though it's the same woman in two different contexts,
right.
So I was watching it on the edge of my seat a little bit, being like, "How is this going to get?"
Yeah, that was a fun one. I really enjoyed that one.
Another question I wanted to ask you about A Christmas Wish in Hudson was they have a really great Christmas parade scene.
Yeah.
And I kind of thought, this seems like it's going to take a lot of coordination, a lot of money to put that on. Was that part of the original script, or was that something they added later knowing they could afford to do it?
Well, so that's actually funny. I do know about that, even though I wasn't on set. So Hudson, Wisconsin actually does have a Christmas parade every year, and that was stock footage from a previous parade. And then they added the actors in with a small crowd because, again, it was during COVID that they filmed it. So I don't know how they merged it, but they made it look to where it was like they were at the parade, even though a lot of that was stock footage.
Okay. Oh, little movie magic.
Yeah.
Well, that was going to be another question I had for you, just as a screenwriter in general. When you're writing these kinds of movies, are you kind of budget minded in what you write?
Yeah, no, I am very, I wasn't keeping budget in mind, like, especially for the first movie or not. But now that I kind of see the way they work, I definitely keep budget in mind, because again, most of these movies are lower budget, and you don't want to have these over the top expensive scenes. There's even a joke. So a current one I'm doing, which is non-Christmas, I do have an airport scene in it, and it's here in New Mexico. And that has been a challenge to do with all the traffic and the buses and everything that comes by. And I was like, mental note, don't do another airport scene, because those are expensive, right? And they're hard to do. So I'm trying to keep that in mind more.
Does that affect your ability to sell a script?
No, like if you do put an expensive scene or something that like they can't do, usually the producer or the production company will say like, hey, we can't do such and such scene. Can you figure out another way to do it, or place it in another location or something? And usually I don't have a problem with that if there's a budgetary need for it. I totally get it. But yeah, I try to think about budget, because I feel like now as a screenwriter, you have to be a screenwriter. And then for the rewrites, you also have to put on your producer hat and kind of look at it like, okay, what is a producer going to see about this? And what is the budget going to be? And things like that.
And you were actually you got an executive producer credit for Christmas Checklist.
Yeah. So how that happens? So that is unusual.
Oh, is
Uh,
it?
yeah. So usually, executive producer, you usually have some kind of financial investment in the movie. But the reason I got that, and you'll see this on a lot of movies, maybe some movies that you've seen, but I wrote the novel version to that as well. And because I wrote the novel, they gave me an executive producer credit. So you'll see that on some movies where the movie is based on a novel. You'll see the author as an executive producer because it's based on their underlying material. So that's why I got that credit for that one.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So where can people find a copy of the novel of the Christmas Checklist?
Yeah, so it's on Amazon. I do also have a website. It's called thechristmaschecklist.com, and there's links to the Amazon book on there.
That one had an original idea, the checklist, and was the worry box something of your invention as well? The box where the daughter's encouraged to put her worries.
Yeah. Yeah, that came about. So that was another little interesting behind the scenes story. So I originally didn't have the worry box in there. I had this box where I had this I thought it was kind of a joke where, she's grieving and she's like, Mom, if you're watching over me or whatever, please give me a sign. And then she went to the refrigerator and a box dropped on her head, which I thought was kind of funny. And then it had the Christmas checklist in it. And they were like, no, we just can't have this box dropping on her head. Like there has to be some purpose for it. And I was like, okay. And then I just thought of the worry box and did that. But it ended up being cute because it was that was one of the flashbacks they kept of her with her mom. And her mom did this little thing where you take your worries and you put them in the box and then you put the lid on them and you don't have to think about them anymore. So it ended up being really cute instead of funny. So
it was a great bit of business showing how
Yeah.
those two characters related and giving them a reason to have a dialogue.
Yeah.
An early part of Christmas Checklist also has her just walking past the mantle that's covered in sympathy cards.
Right.
And again, I don't mean to besmirch other writers who don't do as good a job as you, but I thought that was a fantastically subtle way to illustrate what had happened. Time had passed, and so had her mother. And I just immediately understood what was going on, and it wasn't being handled in exposition or another character being like, "Oh, by the way, I heard your mother."
Right. Well, and thank you for commenting on that, because that was one thing that I realized in my own process of grief is that right after someone you love passes, you get flooded with all these sympathy cards, and it's very nice and it's a lovely gesture. But then there's a time like 2 weeks after, it's like you feel so alone, and like everybody, like that's kind of gone away and you don't have that support. And so I kind of wanted to show that in the movie, that she's feeling really alone now. Like she had a lot of support at first, and that was one way to show just all the cards on there, like, because you get overwhelmed with all these sympathy cards. But then 2 weeks later there's nothing, and then she's alone in her mom's house and she's feeling lonely. And so that was a way to visually show that. Yeah.
Another thing that I was really excited about was in Sappy Holiday, making one of the characters a chef, as someone who loves to cook and loves food, and getting into that. And I noticed that there was a little bit of a food theme in some of the other movies as well, especially the first one, A Christmas Wish in Hudson.
Yeah, because he was a firefighter, and
and he made the best chili, and then goes on a date with a woman who is pretending to know about chili.
Right. Well, so let me just tell you how that idea came about, because we're talking about like sometimes how these movie ideas came about. So that Christmas Wish in Hudson is about a woman who sees a firefighter who's competing in this reality show, and she's like, wow, that guy looks like the guy in my dreams, right? And then she goes to find, kind of like a riff on Sleepless in Seattle as well. I got that idea because my husband and I watch all these reality shows about cooking, like Hell's Kitchen and Top Chef and Chopped and all this. And so we were watching this episode of Chopped, and there were these firefighters competing, and there was this one really good looking firefighter. He was competing, and I made a joke to my husband, like, wow, I bet after this show he's going to have floods of women like contacting him on Instagram and all that. And then poof, I was like, okay, there's my idea for my Christmas movie. So that's how that came about.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, the friend I was watching that movie with, we both we both found that part to be really
Right.
exciting. Like all these women are flying
Right.
from across the country to
Just
Hudson,
to try to
Wisconsin.
meet him. Yep.
Yeah, just talk, and he has to run around town in a Santa costume
Right.
to keep his privacy.
Right. Yep.
I particularly like that one woman said, "I flew all the way from Portland, Oregon."
Right.
I thought, that is
Well, and that's where, as a writer, you try to incorporate things from your life, where you've lived, where you've been. And so I was like, I got to shout out to my homies in Portland, Oregon.
right on. But going back to Sappy Holiday, I thought the way you incorporated food into that script and cooking in that script was amazing.
Yeah.
I was really excited to watch.
Joy. Her name was Joy. Vanessa Sears is the actress. Yeah.
Yeah, her character Joy coming up with different ways to cook with maple syrup.
Right. Yeah.
I
had to research that.
Okay. I didn't know if that was something in the course of your research. Did you find a lot of great maple syrup recipes?
Yes. And so I tried to incorporate that in when I realized she went to a maple farm. I was Googling like what maple recipes, and maple goes good with salmon and other stuff. So yeah.
I also want to compliment you on that movie having
the doctor boyfriend. He was a doctor.
Yeah, she already had a boyfriend, but making him kind of a clear villain in nice, subtle ways.
Right.
A lot of these other movies, people just say things outright.
Right.
Cast them as some kind of antagonist or some kind of obstacle. He was a more rounded character, just making little comments like, coaster.
Right.
When she tried to put a glass down.
Right.
Not when she gets stranded on the side of the road. He asks about the car first.
Right. Instead of her. Well, and that's the funny thing is, like in these movies, like with the antagonists, so to speak, they don't want you to make them like too much of a jerk or whatever. But to me, it was kind of like I was just trying to show that they're like totally, like maybe they fell in love at the beginning and maybe they were on the same career path and they fell in love because they were both motivated to do big things. But as they went on in the relationship, they realized that they're very different. Like he's very, has to have everything perfection and the coasters and not stains. And she's very energetic and bubbly. And so I was just trying to show the contrast that they're really not made for each other. So, well,
and it kind of shows how you evolved and have made a much better movie with Christmas. I'm going to keep bragging about Christmas Checklist because I enjoyed it so much.
I mean, that's my favorite one. Like if you ask me, like out of all the movies I've written, which is my favorite one, and that one is just because, again, it was very personal. It was me like out onto the page, all my emotions, all the everything that I had in me, I put out, and so that's kind of my favorite movie. So thank you for that.
What I liked about that too is it actually had a B story.
Yeah.
So many movies, if they have a B story, it includes the main characters still, so that it doesn't quite count.
Right.
But the whole thing with Kat and Patty,
right,
being kind of at odds in the party planning committee,
right.
Watching that, it was a revelation to me. I was like, there are characters here who actively do not like each other.
Right.
And then a step beyond that even mainstream movies don't always do. You had them kind of resolve and figure out their disagreement, and I really appreciated that. I mean, by virtue of the checklist, but the main part of the movie, but still seeing that I thought was a very intelligent and unexpected thing, and I really appreciated that.
Yeah, thank you. I'm a fan of movies where they do have not just the main couple or the main characters, but there's lessons for all the characters, whether it be friendship, whether it be romance, because there were different romances in that as well, like with his brother, and then the girl that had the crush on him, on the lead, and she realized that she needed to be independent and have fun on her own, and she didn't necessarily need a date for the Christmas party. And so I tried to have different like characters have their own arcs as well, not just the main ones.
That is amazing, because you don't see in a Christmas romance movie anyone touching the idea of being better off alone.
Right.
All these movies are about coupling up exclusively.
Yep.
And your inclusion of his brother having a boyfriend.
Right. Exactly.
Even though it was kind of subtle.
Right. Yeah. Well, and you'll find some of these scripts, these Christmas romance men write, and again, that's fine, but sometimes you'll see where you're like, as a female watching it, you're like, I wonder if that guy really understood what it's like to be in a woman's head or vice versa. I don't know what it's like to be in a guy's head, but I have a husband, I have a brother, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I try to put myself in people's shoes.
Well, and like you say, even though there's a formula,
Yeah.
you still have to make something special out of it. You still have to make it work.
Right.
The formula
Exactly.
does not actually just write itself. It takes a
Right.
talented screenwriter to do that. We've talked about kind of the things that you don't often see
Yeah.
movies. Do you get feedback ahead of time? Like if people are considering your script before production starts, they come at you with, we need you to rewrite a whole bunch of stuff because we don't want to represent these kinds of things, like someone going to a party alone.
Yeah, I mean, you do get that. I'm trying to think of a specific example. But yeah, you do get that, like, because
like cussing. I know cursing.
Oh yeah,
I
you can't
actually
curse.
made
Yeah.
a note that in Christmas Checklist, Noah says she's at one point when he stumbles,
Right.
and it
Right.
stuck out to me. As this
Right.
is the only thing, the closest thing to a cuss word I've heard
Right.
in any of these movies.
Right.
It's not
Yeah.
even a real one.
No, and you can't have that. And there's certain rules, like, you can't have them be like heavy drinkers. Obviously, you can't have them have like beer and alcohol and like
That's
all
right.
this
Everyone
stuff.
goes to a Christmas party, but like no one drinks.
Right.
I didn't
Well,
notice that.
I think wine's acceptable now, but yeah.
Okay. They just that
But
in
yeah,
Sappy
they'll tell
Holiday they
you.
were just drinking maple syrup the whole time. That's not true. That's
Not true. Not true. They would be in a diabetic coma if they were doing that, right? The movie takes on a different turn.
I mean, if not specific, but do they give you notes about how to kind of trim and shape it to conform to the standards of a Christmas romance movie?
Yeah, they will. They'll come back and say, like, don't put this in there, or this joke, like, I'll try to be funny, and they're not big on humor per se. I mean,
That
it's not,
is another thing I've noticed that I didn't want to critique necessarily, but I mean, it doesn't seem like these are meant to be comedies
no.
or
So
laugh out loud comedies.
right. They're not. So I wouldn't even call them rom-coms, and that's why this says Christmas romances, because I try to sometimes go a little edgy and be a little comedic and rom-com-y, and they don't like that because it's just about the characters and their growth and their arc. And so if you try to be too funny, like, you'll get a note like someone either doesn't understand the humor, or like, oh, let's take that joke out or whatever. And so I'll get some notes like that. And sometimes I'm attached to them. I'm like, no, that was so funny. Damn, but I take it out.
Well, I mean,
So,
there's the classic phrase, you have to kill your darlings, but
right.
I imagine when you put so much work into a screenplay,
Yeah.
every little thing that
Yeah.
gets cut, there's probably not a lot that you're prepared to sacrifice up front.
Right. And you do have to learn. I tell people, that in one of my screenwriting classes that I teach is like, you cannot be attached to your baby, because you'll get some notes where you got to cut this, you got to cut this, you got to change this, you got to change the occupation, you got to change the setting. You just can't be attached to it. You just have to try to figure out. The way I look at it is, you just try to figure out like how to do their note, but still keeping your voice and your essence. Right. You know what I mean?
What was the process for you getting your first script produced?
Yeah, no. So the funny thing is, I did all my 5 movies without an agent, without any representation. I now have an agent, but my first 5 movies, no representation. So the best way to break into the industry is through a recommendation from someone. So a gal I worked with, I pitched to somebody that was in the industry, basically, that had a lot of affiliations with people. And she read my script and she mentored me on it and worked with me on it. And then she loved it so much. And she also saw, I think a lot of people vet people, like they want to find out if you're an easy to work with writer or not. So what happened was, this person found out that I was easy to work with because she'd say like, well, make this change. And I would do it and submit it. And she'd be like, oh, wow, she did everything I said. And so she knew Nicely Entertainment, a producer at Nicely Entertainment. And she emailed that producer, Vanessa Shapiro, and said, hey, I've got this script from this writer. Would you be willing to look at it? I highly recommend it. And that's how I got in. So a recommendation goes so far. And then Nicely Entertainment, if you notice, if you look on my IMDb, they've done all my 5 movies, but with co-producers. So they were a producer on all my 5 movies, but then they had co-producers, like on Christmas Checklist, and Chendo Productions in Canada was a co-producer with them.
Right.
But yeah, they have different co-producers. But once you find a champion, I think it's all about finding a champion who believes in you and recommends your writing, because then once you get in the door, you can it opens other doors.
That's great. The very last thing we're going to say is you're currently in production with a new movie that will come out next year.
Yeah,
Anything else about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a non-Christmas one, but it's still in the romance genre, and so it's being filmed here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, which is where I live, and so that was exciting. I've been able to be on set. I go on set tomorrow, and we'll see. It's supposed to come out, from what I hear, in May of next year. So I would just say, if anybody wants to follow me, my website, I have a website, lisahepner.com, and then all my social media on there. You can follow me there so that you can find out the actual details of when it comes out.
Oh, awesome. We will definitely put links to those in the description for this video.
Oh, thank you.
As well, a link to where you can purchase the novel Christmas Checklist, and also watch the movie. A lot of these movies are on Tubi right now, so definitely check them out. There's no reason to miss out on Lisa Hepner's great screenwriting.
Oh, thank you.
And thank you so much for being a guest on our show.
Yay, thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Thank you to everyone for listening. As always, you can find all the movies we've talked about. There'll be a link to our letterbox list for all these, as well as links to where you can find Lisa's movies. And check out our Facebook page. Every time we're doing research for the movies we're going to talk about, I find articles and things, and I'll publish them on the Facebook page as well. Again, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.